Okay, so you're here because you like to get to the heart of things. You want to understand what's really happening right and quickly. That's exactly what we're doing here. And today it's brain-computer interfaces, BCIs. We've really gone deep on all the recent development.
Absolutely. The research is incredible right now.
We're going to bring you the most crucial insights.
Yeah, so BCI's brain-computer interfaces are technology that allow the brain to communicate directly with devices. And it does this by reading the brain's activity, translating it into commands. I mean, the concept's been around for decades, but the pace of advancement lately, it's just remarkable.
It really is. And, I know our listeners are following this really closely. And today we're going to focus on two key things. First, we're going to look at all the advancements that are happening so rapidly in human trials. And specifically, we'll dive into Neuralink's work and then a huge initiative that's happening in China. And then second, we're going to explore this really fascinating story of Nolan Arbaugh. He's the first person to receive a Neuralink implant. So this is going to give you this kind of like bird's eye view of the progress that's happening, but also a very real human impact.
That's right. The goal here is to sort of distill these core insights about where BCI tech stands today.
Exactly.
We want you to understand how far these human trials have come, what it means for individuals, in their day-to-day lives,
Right.
and just sort of the emerging questions that are coming up as this field really accelerates.
So let's unpack all this.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's start with human trials.
Okay.
Because things are moving so fast.
Yeah.
So, when we talk about implantable BCIs, Neuralink is the name that probably pops into most people's minds, right? Founded by Elon Musk, of course. And their goal is to create this, fully internal interface. And they made headlines back in January of 2024 with their first human implant.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings us to Nolan Arbaugh and his story. It really highlights what this technology can do right now.
Yeah, I mean, what's remarkable about Nolan is his motivation. So he was paralyzed below the shoulders from a diving accident back in 2016. And his participation in the Neuralink trial wasn't just about being part of, scientific progress. It really stemmed from this deep desire to regain some of that independence that he had lost.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Neuralink implant, which they call a link, it works by detecting the neural signals related to his intended movements.
Right.
And these signals are then wirelessly transmitted to a computer, which lets him control a cursor,
Yeah.
a keyboard. I mean,
Yeah.
really incredible stuff.
And the impact on his life has been so significant. We've heard he's able to play chess and video games again. You know, these are activities that were impossible before.
Cool.
It's just such a powerful example of, what this technology can restore.
Absolutely. And it's, we have to remember that Nolan wasn't the only one.
Yeah.
There have been reports of 2 other individuals who've received Neuralink implants since then.
Mm-hmm.
One reportedly played Counter-Strike 2,
Oh.
controlling both the mouse and the keyboard.
Yeah.
Elon Musk has also publicly stated his goal is to perform another 20 to 30 of these surgeries this year,
Wow.
which tells you that they're really trying to expand their human trials.
Yeah, there was a slight setback early on, though, with Nolan's implant wasn't there. Something about some of the threads retracting.
That's right. And that's a really important point to keep in mind. These are challenges, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, initially, some of the neural threads, which are incredibly fine, by the way, in Nolan's implant did retract, which, of course, raised concerns.
Mm.
But it seems like those issues have since stabilized, which is, fantastic news.
Yeah.
But it really just underscores the fact that this technology is experimental and it's really complex. I mean, creating a reliable implant,
Yeah.
that's going to be long-term and interact seamlessly with the brain tissue, it's a huge challenge.
So Neuralink has really captured the spotlight here, but, they're not the only ones making significant progress.
Right.
Your sources also highlight a really rapid effort happening in China. This is fascinating. Can you tell us about this initiative that's based in Beijing?
Yeah, so this is where it gets really interesting because when you look globally at what's happening, in Beijing, you've got the Chinese Institute for Brain Research, CIBR,
Okay.
and they partnered with this company called New Cyber Neurotech. And their goal is to implant their semi-invasive wireless brain chip, which is called Buy Now, Know One, into a lot of people fairly quickly. I mean, they're targeting 13 people by the end of this year.
Wow.
And they've already done the implant on 3 patients in just the last month.
That's a very ambitious timeline.
It really is. And they're even more ambitious than that. So next year, New Cyber is planning much larger clinical trials. They're saying potentially around 50 patients. It's pending regulatory approval, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But if they reach that scale, Buy Now, Know One could become the chip with the highest number of human patients globally. surpassing, even big names like Synchron and Neuralink.
Yeah.
So the amount of data that they'll be able to collect from all these patients will be invaluable for understanding the long-term effects
Right.
and improving the capabilities. It's really exciting.
We've also seen demonstrations, haven't we, of what this Bino No one chip can do?
Yeah, there have been a number of reports and state media releases showing patients using it to control a robotic arm. They've shown them pouring water, even transmitting their thoughts onto a computer screen.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's really quite
You
remarkable.
see it actually, in action.
Yeah, it gives you a real glimpse into its capabilities.
And they're not just stopping at this semi-invasive ship, are they?
No, they're not. CIBR and NewCyber are also working on an invasive wireless chip, which they're calling Bano No 2. It's actually quite similar in design to Neuralink's implant. So they're also going for that direct neural interface. And they're anticipating that they'll start human trials for Bano No 2 in the next 12 to 18 months.
So it's kind of interesting, right? We've got them developing both these less invasive and more invasive approaches simultaneously.
Yeah.
So you've got Neuralink going with the invasive approach, and then you've got this group in China doing both. So how does all of this compare to some of the other companies that are in the space, like you mentioned Synchron earlier?
Right. So Synchron actually currently has the lead in terms of number of people with the implant. They have 10 patients in total,
Okay.
6 in the U.S. and 4 in Australia.
Got it.
What's really interesting about Synchron is their approach to implantation. They've got this device called the stentrode. It's actually implanted through the jugular vein.
Oh, wow.
So it's way less invasive than the brain surgery that Neuralink requires. We even heard about a Synchron user being able to use it with Apple's Vision Pro
That's interesting.
for things like virtual travel. So it really shows you the diverse applications
It
that
does.
are emerging.
So it seems like there's this kind of divergence in approach,
Yeah.
You've got Neuralink going for that really direct connection.
Yeah.
And then others are saying, let's explore this less invasive route. So what are the trade-offs then?
That's a great question. And it's really crucial for understanding what the future might hold.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Neuralink's argument for their more invasive approach is that they get much higher signal quality.
Mm-hmm.
Because their sensors are positioned so close to the neurons, they're getting more precise control over devices.
Right.
So this higher fidelity could unlock much more complex applications in the future. But of course, the trade-off is the risk, right?
Yes.
Open brain surgery, the possibility of damaging delicate brain tissue.
Mm-hmm.
So it might be that initially it's only used for folks with the most severe needs.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Whereas companies like Synchron, who are going with the semi-invasive or going through the blood vessels, they're prioritizing safety and ease of implantation. So a signal quality might be a bit lower, but it also means lower risk of long-term complications
Right.
and maybe wider use for more people.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
So it's really about advantages and disadvantages. And, ultimately it depends on the application in each individual circumstances.
So we're seeing all this progress getting these interfaces into people using different methods.
Yeah.
But let's zoom out for a second, because how do these things actually work? What's the technology behind it all?
Okay, so at the very basic level, a BCI works by detecting the electrical signals
Okay.
that are made by neurons in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So when we think or we move, even when we imagine an action, our neurons are talking to each other through these little electrical impulses.
Mm.
And so the BCI uses electrodes or sensors to pick up these signals.
Mm-hmm.
And then sophisticated algorithms and machine learning come in and translate these neural patterns into digital commands that a computer can understand and then act on.
Right.
So you're basically learning the language of the brain and using that to control technology.
And you mentioned that Neuralink's implant is about the size of a coin.
Right.
What's its structure? How does it connect to the brain?
So the link, as they call it, is really tiny.
Hmm.
But attached to that are these really fine neural threads. People describe them as thinner than a human hair.
Wow.
And those threads have the sensors on them.
Okay.
They're implanted into specific areas of the brain for motor control.
Got it.
And those sensors can both record the electrical signals from the neurons, and in the future, they'll be able to emit electrical currents
Oh, wow.
to stimulate activity. And I mean, the precision required to implant these threads, it's incredible. They're so delicate that they actually had to build a special neurosurgical robot
That makes sense.
to make sure they get placed correctly and safely.
So the initial focus really seems to be restoring motor function and communication for people who are paralyzed. But the potential applications go way beyond that, don't they? What else are they exploring?
Yeah, I mean, the applications are really quite broad. There's a lot of interest in using them to restore things like sight and hearing
Yeah.
by directly stimulating the parts of the brain that control those senses.
Wow.
And they're also looking at neurological conditions like epilepsy
Hmm.
to predict and maybe even prevent seizures,
Wow.
Alzheimer's disease, to modulate neural activity, Parkinson's disease,
Hmm.
to help with tremors, even OCD using deep brain stimulation.
It's incredible.
Yeah, it's amazing the breadth of research that's happening right now.
And mental health is even in the picture, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of research looking at how BCIs could be used to monitor and even treat certain mental health conditions like depression
Hmm.
or anxiety.
Right.
The idea is you identify these patterns in brain activity that are associated with those conditions.
Yeah.
And then you can start to think about targeted interventions, right?
Hmm.
Maybe it's subtle electrical stimulation
Mm.
or some other form of neuromodulation that can be delivered by the BCI.
Yeah.
It's still very early days, but it's incredibly promising.
It is. I mean, are we kind of going in this direction of cognitive enhancement too?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely being talked about.
Hmm.
You know, the idea that BCIs could enhance cognitive abilities like memory, focus, attention.
Yeah.
There's a lot of research going on in that area.
It's fascinating.
It is. And of course, being able to control advanced prosthetics and exoskeletons
Yeah.
just with thought. I mean, that could be so transformative
Yeah.
for amputees or folks with mobility impairments. It's about intuitive control, really.
So the potential is huge.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really exciting. But let's get back to the present and Nolan Arbaugh's experience,
Okay.
because it kind of tells us about the more subtle realities of living with this technology right now.
Yeah. Nolan's story is so valuable because it gives us those real-world insights.
Yeah.
So one of the key things is the daily calibration.
Okay.
So our brains are always adapting.
Right.
It's called neuroplasticity.
Mm-hmm.
And even the way neurons fire can change.
Yeah.
So Nolan has to do this daily calibration.
What does that involve?
Well, he's described it as a game.
Hmm.
He uses his thoughts to move a cursor to targets on a screen.
Got it.
And essentially what he's doing is fine-tuning the connection between his brain signals
Right.
and the computer commands.
Right.
So the system stays accurate and responsive.
So it's not a one-time setup.
That's
It's
right.
a constant sort of back and forth
Yeah.
learning process.
Yeah. And Nolan has said he's seen a real progression in his control. He started with simple things like left clicking.
Right.
And now he can do more complex things, right-clicking, zooming, scrolling.
Mm-hmm.
But he says things like clicking and dragging are still tricky.
Yeah.
So even simple computer interactions require a lot of coordination.
Yeah.
And the BCI is still learning how to interpret all that for him.
And he uses existing tech, too, alongside the Neuralink implant, doesn't he,
Yeah.
to do things?
So for emails, texts, or even journaling, he actually uses dictation software,
Oh, interesting.
mostly Siri.
Okay.
Although Neuralink has made a program specifically for him, too.
Wow.
But they're also working on being able to write just by thought.
Really?
Yeah. So imagine holding a pen,
Wow.
forming the letters. And they're making progress. But the accuracy and the speed isn't quite where they want it yet.
So even in these early stages, it's clear the tech has really impacted his sense of autonomy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's talked about how it felt like magic at first.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to do things we take for granted.
Mhm.
Emails, ordering food online, playing chess,
Mm-hmm.
even just being alone for longer without needing help. It's just really improved his life in so many ways.
And he's also shared his perspective on Elon Musk's role in all of this, right?
Yeah, he's...
Making this available to him.
So he definitely acknowledges Musk's role
Mm-hmm.
and how the implant has changed his life.
Yeah.
But he's careful not to, hero worship.
Right.
He recognizes Musk's trying to help people like him,
Mm-hmm.
but he's staying grounded and realistic about it.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into brain-computer interfaces, what are the key takeaways that you want our listeners to remember?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that progress in this field is accelerating.
Yeah.
What Neuralink's doing, what's happening in China, it really shows that this technology is becoming viable.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen through Nolan's story how life-changing it can be for people with disabilities.
Absolutely.
It can give them back their independence, help them connect with the world in a new way.
But we have to remember that it's still very early. There are challenges, limitations,
Of course, yeah.
but they're working through them.
Right, and we've only touched on the medical applications.
Right.
We've talked about sensory restoration, treatment for neurological and mental health conditions, even cognitive enhancement. The research there is really exciting.
So for our listeners who like to stay ahead of the curve, why should they keep paying attention to all of this?
Because BCIs are really a frontier
Yeah.
with the potential to change society in so many ways.
Mm-hmm.
Revolutionize healthcare, human augmentation. It's even raising these fundamental questions about how we interact with technology in the future. So understanding the tech, the progress, the direction it's all going in,
Yeah.
it's essential, I think.
So as we look forward, here's a thought I'll leave you with. As this technology keeps evolving and maybe even becomes more integrated into our lives, how do you see it shaping our understanding of ourselves, our interactions with the world? What possibilities are you most excited about? And what questions are still in your mind as all this unfolds? Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We'll see you next time.
See you then.